to ask you to do me a favor. For the next hour, forget about what you know. Forget about the obstacles that we all put in our own thought process as we go through life every day, of what is possible and not possible. Because invariably, life moves so fast that what we think is possible today, or impossible today, is likely to become possible tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after. Our grandparents could not possibly imagine life today. You cannot possibly imagine life 25 years from now. Nobody can. We have an idea, but nobody can really figure out exactly what it means. So, let's see if we can get going. Well, a few disclaimers before I start, real quick. And by the way, my memory is not as good as it used to be, so I'm going to have to read the screen a lot, right? And so if I turn my back on you, don't take it personally, okay? So, this presentation and the thoughts within it are mine and mine alone. They do not represent the thoughts or policies of Tarrant County or anything else. No mention of a company, organization, or product constitutes an endorsement. So if I mention a company and you decide to buy stock in that company, that's your problem, not mine, okay? It could tank, right? Also, it's time to think big. It's time to think big because technology moves at an asymptotic pace, and so things are only getting more and more exciting and faster and faster. So, an accelerating evolutionary road. How many of you have a science background in biology? Oh, a couple of you. You actually know what prokaryotes means. All right, okay. Single-cell organisms to sentiency, or us, being able to think, know ourselves, 3.5 to 4 billion years. I'm sorry? Yeah, no, it took this time, right? From sentiency to Homo sapiens sapiens, who we are, took about 7 million years. From Homo sapiens sapiens to ENIAC, the first real computer, it took about 300,000 years. From ENIAC to today's supercomputers, and I'll be talking about the HPE frontier a little later, it took 77 years. So the question then becomes, from the HPE frontier to engineered sentiency, not artificial intelligence, but engineered sentiency, how long is it going to take? Now you will notice that the timelines keep getting faster, the intervals keep getting shorter, but the leaps in functionality keep growing larger and larger and larger, right? Is that likely to stop or slow down? No, it's not. There's a thought called the law of accelerating returns, which basically states that because we are using technology to develop technology, it becomes like a tsunami of activity that keeps accelerating, right? Ray Kurzweil, by the way. If you ever heard of Ray Kurzweil, you should buy all of his books. If you haven't, you should buy all of his books. Either way, you should buy all of his books, okay? And you should read them or listen to them. Far shorter timelines, far faster progress. So it continues to accelerate, right? We expect it to continue to accelerate. Now, at the same time, there's an interesting phenomenon that's developing, especially over the last 150 years or so, which is the rise in human longevity, how long we live. So, Homo habilis, again, for those of you who know anthropology and read all about the primitive men, this was one of the first ones. And when I say men, I mean men and women, okay? So, mankind, so to speak. It's the language's fault, not mine, all right? Homo habilis, 20 to 30 years maximum lifespan, okay? Because life was tough, right? Brutish life, infant mortality, the elements, very short lives. Middle Ages, not that long ago, right? In the 1300s, 1400s. Life expectancy was 30 to 40. Agriculture showed up, some medical knowledge, trade, people started trading things,
There was even an OBGYN sort of precursor to start with, delivery women that actually knew how to deliver babies, that substantially reduced mortality at birth, right? So, 1900 London, at the time, the most advanced city, possibly in the entire world, and certainly in Western civilization. Yet longevity was only 45 to 50. Remarkable, huh? 1900, London, you'd expect it to be much higher. It's not. But nutrition started coming about. Hygiene, very, very important. Developing medical know-how contributed some advances. And then it started really accelerating. 1950, in the US, 70. Now that's an enormous leap, right? Here's the number one reason why that leapt so much. Right there, urban sewer systems. Because all of a sudden we eliminated all the people that died of cholera, right? Of dysentery, of diarrhea, right? Because of contamination. Water. Now there was water purification. Antibiotics show up right before World War II. Vaccines start getting developed. Pasteurization, like Dr. Pasteur, right? So that the milk now could be taken care of in advance. And of course, neonatality care, because a lot of early deaths with neonates were because of just absolute lack of knowledge. 2019, US, 78.9. Again, a pretty big launch when you think about humankind and what we expect of aging processes. Modern medication, meds, radiology, nutrition, safety, knowing about the genome, right? 2003, the genome gets published. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Venter at Celera at the time, because I was working in a biotechnology startup. Amazing time, amazing time. And believe it or not, over the last 50 years, weather-related deaths are down by over 90%. You wouldn't expect that, would you? Keep hearing about all these things that happen, right? Weather-related deaths down dramatically, right? Now in 2020 in the US, 77.8. You will notice that it goes down, right? Why? COVID-19, and then subsequently drug use and suicide. But this was a blip in time. So now what's going to happen? Well, by 2020 in the US, my bet is that we will have two branches. People that live to 120 and people that live to 85. What is the difference between the two groups? Anybody? Dinero, plata, money, right? Split amongst wealth levels, right? But this will be a short-lived interval, because what will happen is things that prolong your life will be extremely expensive at first, but then via massification, they will get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until everybody can take advantage of it, right? Much like cell phones, right? My first cell phone was in 1986, I think, okay? It was extremely expensive, right? Nowadays, there are literally billions of cell phones all over the world, even in populations that are incredibly poor, right? And so this too will see that type of advance. So, at the same time, an inward migration. Now what do I mean by that? Environmental, cavemen, shelter and fire became huge advances in terms of the ability to live for a longer period of time. External medical advances, for example, amputations, excisions of cancer, tooth extractions, all of a sudden allow people to live longer. Because if you have a tooth infection, and again it's untreated, you will have heart problems within a very short period of time. Nobody knew that, but then people would drop dead of heart attacks and everything else in the Middle Ages. Nobody knew why. But the moment that tooth extractions came about, that started happening. Now you'll notice, we're outside, external medical advances, right? Civilizational advances, sewers and clean water, we already talked about. Now all of a sudden, we get into a different realm, into internal medical advances. Antibiotics, now you're dealing at the cell level. You're dealing with bacterial infections. Chemo, statins, right? What people take today for cholesterol levels, right? Vitamins, all of these are now internal work intracellularly in order to provide you with a much better health outcomes, right? So, and now we're getting to the next level. Intracellular therapies with things like endocytosis, peptides, viral vectors, nanoparticles. Little known fact, the COVID vaccine is composed of nanoparticles, right? There's a lot of medications nowadays that are starting to use viral vectors, especially with gene therapies, that are going into the DNA itself. DNA and RNA altering techniques, gene replacement, gene editing, and gene silencing. Okay? Now, how many of you have heard of CRISPR? Read about it. Read about it. CRISPR, clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. That's a lot of long words. Let me tell you what it means in rough terms. How many of you are familiar with Word? The word processing? Yeah? It's Word for DNA, right? Where you can go with a substantial amount of precision into your DNA and replace a set of codings with a new coding that optimizes your DNA. You realize how important that is? Right? If it can be done easily. And by the way, when CRISPR came out, it was absolutely revolutionary. Because never, never, never could we edit a portion of DNA and fix or cure a disease. Since then, there have been 3 or 4 iterations of better technology that even improve upon that and make it faster and cheaper and more exact. So, what's behind all of this? Infinite computing power. 2001. My guess is a lot of you weren't born yet. That's kind of scary, but good. 2001, the top 500 supercomputer leaders. There's a list that is created twice a year of the top 500 supercomputers in the world in terms of computational speed, okay? The IBM ASCII weight that performed at 7,226 gigaflops. Now, what the heck is a gigaflop? A gigaflop is a billion floating point operations or calculations per second. Can you even imagine that? A billion per second? So I speak for 3 seconds and 3 billion calculations were made. How amazing is that, right? It's nothing. It's old story. 2023, the top 500 supercomputer leader is the HP Frontier that I mentioned before. What's its speed? 1.2 exaflops. What's an exaflop? It's 1.2 billion gigaflops, which we talked about before that we couldn't even understand. It's a quintillion floating point operation per second. Okay, think about it. 3 seconds, 3 quintillion operations. We can't figure it out. If you can figure it out, you're a much better human being than I am. I'll tell you that. Okay? But yet, is it going to stop here? No, it's not, because now we're going to use this computer to design the next generation of computers, right? So, Aurora and El Capitan, the best name ever for a supercomputer, are in the laboratory now. They're going to be released soon, and they'll be operating at 2 exaflops. So that's 2 quintillion floating operations. Meanwhile, the barriers to entry drop dramatically, because what happens when you can create a computer that works this fast is, in a lot of ways, it devalues all of the other computers that can operate as fast. And so all of a sudden, even regular organizations can afford to buy a computer that 5 years ago was at the top of the top 500, because they come down in price, right? So what does that mean? A boon for open source efforts, right? Anybody can go out there with a lot less capital and all of a sudden start utilizing massive computational power, which before was only available to governments or very large institutions. And what happens when you do open source? All of people's creativity comes to the forefront, like the people in this room. I expect many of you to become absolute luminaries, to become drivers of technology progress. I expect no less of you, right? And the reality is that pretty soon you will join a company that will be able to buy a supercomputer that will enable that creativity to completely transform your world. So you got to look at that possibility. Rapid AI acceleration. Have you noticed that 3 years ago, nobody was really talking about AI except AI people, right? Now all of a sudden, you can't get away from it, right? You can't get, how is that happening? Because it hits that point of acceleration and then it just goes boom, right? That's where we are right now. Now invariably with these things, what happens is it goes boom, and then it goes down a little bit. What a group called Gartner calls the trough of disillusionment. And then all of a sudden it just takes off again, right? Why is that? Because we humans suffer of something that I like to call technology presbyopia. When we hear about something new, our first reaction is it's going to solve everything. And of course, that turns out to be exaggeration. So we overestimate the short term, but then we make up for it by dramatically underestimating the long term, right? And so you really should look at that and think to yourself, okay, at what point in the cycle are all these technologies? And where can I best take advantage of them for my own career and for the betterment of the world? So, an equal boon for rogue operators. Throughout the history of mankind, every technological development has been used for good and for evil, right? And so you will see the same thing with AI. You will see massive development in terms of, health and social services and education and commerce. You'll also see a massive increase in terrorism and hacking and all those types of things. Why? Because the technology is available to everybody and people will take advantage of it. So, and this is all of this before the next level of technology comes to the table and matures. How many of you have heard of quantum computing? I was expecting a few more. You got to read about it. Oh, you were just being shy. Okay, I'm going to repeat it. How many of you have heard of quantum computing? All right, that's a little better. That's a little better. Okay, so quantum computing has been around for a long time, about 15 years or so. But it has slowly but surely approached the level where the technology itself can be controlled and harnessed so that it produces replicable results, right? Because we were dealing with a whole new medium in terms of uncertainty of atomic states and polarities and all of that, and that was difficult to control. Now you can actually buy software as a service, quantum as a service, and perform calculations on a quantum computer that somebody else has developed. So that maturation is right around the corner. I'm going to give you a little example so that you understand the magnitude of this technology. Well, software support is absolutely exploding. This is exactly the same thing that happened with microcomputers, with mini computers, with mainframes, with supercomputers, and now with quantum computers. And software support is the difference between success and failure. Because who wants a computer for which there's no software? Who wants a game console for which the games just are not good, right? With quantum computing, this is at the stage that we're at, mirroring the early supercomputing experience. Hybrid platforms are evolving with task divisions. Now, what do I mean by that? Quantum computing is very good at solving a very specific type of problems. Supercomputers are very good at solving a different kind of computing problems. So if you just use supercomputers to try to solve these problems, you're going to underutilize them. If you use quantum computers to solve these problems, you underutilize them. But if you use supercomputers to solve these problems and quantum computers to solve these problems, you have these hybrid systems that really can create marvels. Fully encrypted quantum networking. when people talk about computers, they often forget that computers need to exchange data, right? Because at the end of the day, and I told this young man here, everything is about data, right? And so in order for computers to really be able to flourish, they have to interchange data. So often we talk about computers, but we don't talk about networking. Let me give you an example. So this is the Peacock detector from NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It was introduced about 2 years ago. It's tiny. But each one of these little, do you see those little fans, the fan spaces right there? Right there? Right? It's almost like a lady's fan, right? Can detect a photon hit at 100 trillionth of a second. What that means is the speed of data that can go into and out of this just absolutely blows to smithereens every networking concept that you ever heard about. How many of you ever heard of Ethernet? Right? Yeah? You're all shy. Come on, I want to see those hands. How about token ring? Have you heard of token ring? Now I only expect 2 hands to go up, right? At 100 trillionths of a second, the ability to push data through and to receive data is absolutely astonishing, which is necessary in order to keep up with the speed of the calculations that take place, right? Leveraging distance entanglement. Now this is a really complicated concept, but the reality is that if you have 2 photons and they are married, they're entangled, and you split them apart, 100 kilometers, 200 miles, and you change this one, guess what happens to this one? It changes. Even though there's no connection between them. If you can understand that, you must be a physics student, because I can't, right? But anyway, but you can leverage distance entanglement for do something like backups, right? And it comes with all kinds of problems, because then you have to make sure that that entanglement only works when you want it to work, right? And you have to have a copy offline of this, because otherwise it changes everything. So, quantum machine learning acceleration is far faster than your regular computational speeds. And it is able to achieve and to handle far larger data sets. Now, remember, I told you it's all about the data, right? Now, when you think about AI, is there magic to it? I mean, how come you can go to ChatGPT and you put something, a question, it comes back, and it's like, wow, how do you do that? You must think. No. There's an enormously large data set. And there's an algorithm that parses through that and optimizes the result and generates it based on machine learning and specific algorithms and rules and produces a result. So you have machines that are incredibly fast, and with large data sets, nothing is impossible, right? You can get information at the speed of light. So, quantum cloud provisioning. You can actually rent space in a quantum computer these days, right? Again, that barrier of entry keeps getting lower and lower and lower. The cybersecurity of quantum encryption. How many of you have heard of post-quantum encryption? No? So, an example, and don't quote me on the exact numbers, but there is a protocol for encryption called 256K AES, right? Which is what you use mostly for your Wi-Fi encryption at your home, right? And so a supercomputer will take, 48 days to break your key on that, okay? A quantum computer will do it in 3 seconds, right? So what does that mean? Is that we have to develop post-quantum encryption algorithms for security and encryption that can withstand this, right? So challenges keep coming and coming and coming. Unthinkable power on demand. And the synergy between AI and quantum will change everything. Because you have this amount of computational capability, this amount of networking capability, together with the ability to store large data sets, and you can have very, very close to sentiency, right? How many of you have heard of the Turing test? Okay, Turing test is a test where an individual asks questions of a computer and tries to determine if it can decide that it is a computer or a human being, okay? For quantum type machines, that is no longer a challenge at all. No longer a challenge. It is virtually impossible to detect whether you're talking to a computer or talking to a human being, regardless of how smart your questions are, right? So, all of this takes us into a AI-driven medical nirvana. And in this room, I think a lot of people know what nirvana means. Am I right? Yeah. Okay. And I don't mean to be a heretic, with all respect. From genetics to epigenetics, we were able to decipher the genome by and large in 2003. And all of a sudden we came to the conclusion that that's just the beginning of the knowledge about genetics. Because when you have the genome, you have proteins being expressed, and then the subsequent interactions of those proteins within your environment. But that is subject to epigenetics, which is all of the situations that occur to you specifically and to every cell specifically based on environmental variables that dictate how genes get expressed, how proteins fold, and how you operate as a human being. We started with the genome. We're moving to the proteome, where we try to figure out how proteins work, to another process that is too complex to go in here, called glycosylation, which deals with how sugars interact with proteins, and protein folding, which is going to be one of the most interesting things and barriers that these computers will break, and they will allow for massive knowledge acquisition. Let me give you an example. When the gene gets expressed and a protein folds in order to create a certain functionality, understanding that allows you to target all of your science to achieve a desired result, right? Now let's look at, for example, antibiotics. The way that antibiotics work is you identify a substance, either natural or artificial, that you create, that knows exactly how the bacteria work and all of the inner workings of the bacteria, including the way that their proteins fold, and it creates docking spaces so that you create an antibiotic that can dock into that exactly and therefore neutralize that bacteria. Okay? If you know exactly how that works from a protein folding standpoint, you can start controlling the direction of nature itself. Optimized therapy progression. So, for the longest time, pharmaceuticals were called compounds. You'd go out in nature, you would identify 100 different compounds, from mold in a tree, to a particular root, to the skin of a root. You brought it into the laboratory, and you tested to see if it had a good effect on a bacteria, for example, right? And if it did, then you had a potential target for an antibiotic. Then you had to make sure that it wasn't dangerous to human beings, so that the problem that you created was bigger than the problem that you were trying to cure. These processes for compounds, on average, took 18 years for all of the testing of the FDA and cost an average of $800 million to bring something to market, right? So, all of a sudden, we see the introduction of biologicals. Have you noticed, if you watch television, well, if you're online, all of these new medications that are coming to the market now constantly, right? It's absolutely amazing. They just keep coming and coming and coming. For example, for dermatological conditions, it's one after the other after the other. Now for things like Skyrizi, right? For controlling diabetes, these things keep coming up and up and up and up and up, right? Why? Because they're biologicals. They're identified from your own body, so that they don't have to go through all of the testing for noxious effects, for having secondary effects that can kill you. And so their development is much, much shorter, much, much cheaper, and allows for those introductions. Okay? So, next we get into pharmacogenomics. There's a medication called Herceptin now that is targeted to a particular condition for people with a very specific genetic makeup. So instead of having a medication that is for everybody, how many of you have heard of aspirin, amoxicillin, penicillin, right? Those are for everybody. With Herceptin, you actually are targeting for a set of individuals that have a very specific genetic profile. So it becomes a lot more targeted. What is the next step of that? Instead of being for a group of individuals, is the creation of individual formulations that are based on your unique genome. So that a medication now becomes a prescription for one person that is driven entirely by your genetic makeup and your epigenetic evolution as a human being, right? No side effects anymore. Absolutely incredible. By the way, with the medications that you see coming up in the marketplace, next time you watch a commercial, look for the last three letters of the medication in its generic term. And you find that it's a monoclonal antibody, okay, mAb, okay? And you see that they all come up with mAb. Why? Because they're monoclonal antibodies that come from your own biologicals. DNA optimization, now we get into a different realm altogether, right? Imagine for a moment that you can analyze the genetic composition of somebody like, let's test this population, Usain Bolt. How many of you know of Usain Bolt? Older guy. Usain Bolt is considered the fastest man alive, right? And so imagine that you can analyze his DNA and figure out exactly the traits that give him the fast twitch muscle that allow him to be the fastest man alive. Would you think that's a desirable trait?
Not for Usain Bolt.
I'm sorry?
Not for Usain Bolt.
Yeah, but for everybody else, absolutely. But would you think that there was, what about eidetic memory? You know, there are people that can remember everything that has ever happened to them, right? If you say, what were you wearing on December 13, 2017? And they'll tell you, oh, there was my khaki pants with my blue polo, and I had a cap on and aviators. Is that a desirable trait? No. Would you like to? Well, one might argue no, right? But one might argue yes. So would you be okay with reading a book once and remembering it forever, every single word? Yeah, at least during finals. Yeah, it'll be great. Right? But there are people that can do that. What does that mean? That means that there is an inherent potential and capability in the human genome for that to occur. Right? What about a salamander? What happens when you pull the tail off a salamander? What happens?
Comes off.
And then? Very good. But then it can grow another one back. Now look at all the amputations. Would it be okay for us to be able to trigger the genes that would allow for a leg to grow back? Go ahead. Go ahead. Mutations. Is that what you said? Yeah, absolutely, right? But so the question is, if that exists in the DNA, to what degree can we recreate it so that you include that portion of DNA into a perfect human being, right? Because if you use CRISPR, remember, word for genes, right? And you identify the exact genes that give you, let's say, being taller, having hair that doesn't fall out, having blue eyes, or green eyes, or brown eyes, or black eyes, whatever this gene trait you want, if you can identify it and incorporate it into a genetic trait for a baby, let's say with pre-implantation diagnosis and change, you could have a perfect baby. Is that a desirable trait? Maybe, maybe not. Will people pay for it? Absolutely. Absolutely, right? So, customized superhumans, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time. Because we're already changing conditions in humans at birth and before birth, so we take care of diseases. So if we can take care of diseases, why not take care of optimization? nanomachines, intracellular DNA regeneration. There was a book in 1986 by a gentleman called Eric K. Drexler, a multidisciplinarian out of MIT, in which he basically said that in the near future, and of course in the history of mankind, that could mean 50 years, 60 years, 100 years, in the near future, we'll be able to inject nano robots that are self-replicating into our body, and that will go through every cell in your body and repair your DNA from all of the mutations and problems that it developed over your entire lifespan, and return it to when you were, let's say, 18. Would that be desirable? Is that possible? Within the near term, I believe it's very, very possible. He thought it was by 2035. I don't think it's going to be that fast, but it's going to be pretty soon after that. Eric K. Drexler, Engines of Creation, 1986, a book worth reading. A book worth reading, because it will expand your mind. Okay, so now, how far in the horizon is immortality? And what does that mean? What does that mean, right? So, curing blindness. Leber congenital amaurosis 2, it's a condition. It's a mutation that lessens or eliminates a specific protein called RPE65. If you don't have RPE65, you have an inability to detect light, which of course turns into blindness. Enter a company called Luxturna. Remember what I said about companies, not an endorsement. They created a healthy copy of the mutated gene that produced RPE65, created an injection between the retina and the epithelium in the eye, and guess what? Partial vision was restored, but it was temporary, because over time the gene and the injection lost its effect. Need a permanent fix. Enter CRISPR, fixing the DNA itself. Trials are underway with patients, with advanced patients. And interestingly enough, this is funny, this is how science works. Individuals completely blind with this condition, will they operate on both eyes simultaneously? No, they will do it on one eye, just to find out exactly what happens, right? There's a control mechanism, right? Trials are underway, and guess what? Amazing results, absolutely amazing results. People are starting to regain vision, okay? By the way, how many of you heard of the launch by Elon Musk of Blindsight? It was announced a couple of days ago. Yeah? Basically, the ability to restore vision to the blind, even to people who are blind from birth, as long as the visual cortex was okay. Absolutely amazing, right? 10 years ago, you would have thought, there's no way. And there it is, right? So, how many of you know sickle cell anemia? Okay. Affects mostly African descent individuals. I always found that was funny, because the reality is that we're all from Africa. We're all from Western Africa, somewhere, way, 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 way back. But anyway, abnormal hemoglobin impairs oxygen delivery, because the hemoglobin is misshapen in the form of a sickle, right? Misshapen cell gets stuck in blood vessels, creates enormous pain, lack of capability, lack of resistance, endurance, even breathing is hard. Strokes, infections, arthritis, pain crisis, terrible, terrible disease. Enter a company called Exocell. CRISPR-based gene therapy. They actually go in, and in the blood-forming stem cells are edited in the bone marrow, produce normal cells, and restore their functions. A couple of months later, the individual is perfectly normal, and so far, it lasts. There are people that have been cured altogether, period, the end, okay? Now, it still costs about $1.2 million per treatment, but over time, that will come down. And getting rid of sickle cell anemia is an amazing feat, right? 96.7, 29 out of 30 patients, crisis-free after 12 months, okay? Gene therapy. Many other opportunities for single cell issues, more complex conditions for cures to follow. They just identified the genetic pattern, a marker for Parkinson's, right? Which affects an enormous amount of the elderly population. Now here's the strange and weird thing that I just read this morning. That's why I like to keep my presentations fresh. Dr. He Jiankui from Guangzhou, did I say that right?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Has discovered that he could change a single gene, CCR5, and provide individuals with HIV immunity. There are 2 babies that are currently in gestation that have been implanted with this gene. So they will be born with HIV immunity. Desirable? You're darn tootin' is right. It opens up all kinds of different issues from a genetic ethics standpoint and everything else, right? But guess what? Those things will happen whether we like them or not, whether we think they're desirable or not, right? And it's always a dual-edged game, right? How many of you think that nuclear reactors are a good thing?
Yep.
How many of you think nuclear explosions are a good thing? No. How many of you think nuclear medicine is a good thing? Dual-edged sword. Dual-edged sword, right? So, now I'm going to blow your mind. Or not. Let's hope not. Let's hope you think about this and you, oh, of course, that makes perfect sense. So, step 1. Maximizing healthy behaviors now. What does that mean? That means that you live right, and instead of dying of arteriosclerosis at 72, you live until the ripe age of 86, which for those of you is a long, long ways away from now, but for me, not so much, right? So allow survival to take advantage of step 2. What's step 2? Step 2 is biotechnology and genomics, which will totally explode in the 2030s, right? All of these things I've just talked about, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. Allow survival to leverage step 3. What's step 3? Nanotechnology and proteomics in the 2040s. The ability to have those nano robots go in and fix your DNA. And if they fix your DNA so that you're 18 forever, not too shabby, huh? Okay, it could be very interesting, right? So, still around to enjoy, or not, step 4. What's step 4? So, this gets into very heavy anthropological, spiritual, religious stuff, right? But let me ask you this. Let's say that you have a series of accidents and you get both legs, both arms replaced, your lungs replaced, your liver replaced, your heart replaced, your intestines replaced. All of that's possible today, right?
Yeah.
Are you still the same person?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
No. No.
No. Okay. There you go.
No.
I'm still Andre if I have 2 artificial legs, 2 artificial hands, or not. Okay.
But
Hmm?
the experience will change your mentality.
Oh, no, yeah, but I'm still the same individual.
Yes.
All right, yeah, okay. Right. So, now let's assume for a moment that you can back up 100% of your brain. Okay? Back it up, put it over here. And then you back up another 5% of your brain, and you put it over here. And then you continue backing it up, right? And what is this? Is a very large data set. Right? It's a very large data set, incredibly complicated, but it's a data set. And now let's assume over time you have 100% of Andre backed up over here. And you have an algorithm with rules that basically allows that copy of Andre to think and act like this copy of Andre. And then you replace the entire body, because if you have my DNA, you can create a clone. And now you put all of that and back it up into that individual. Is that still Andre?
It's the shit with feces, right?
Mhm.
No, it's not the question. You're not, it's Same shit.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Absolutely right. You can replace every single aspect of a car that you own, every single one, right? Is it still the same car? Okay, so there you go. Something to think about, right? But the truth is that if you do a digital backup and replication and virtualization, you could end up with somebody who lives in the ether, who is exactly who you are, but now not in the physical realm, but a virtual realm. How many of you live fairly active virtual lives on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and X and all of that? Right? So how do you go to the next level? How about real life? Remember real life? That came and went, right? Virtual reality, the metaverse, all of that, right? Excitement, disillusionment, explosion, right? So that's what faces all of us. Immortality? Yeah, but as what? Something to think about. All right, the essence of being. Who are we? What about the question of a soul? Does a complete replication of me have the same soul as me? Think about it. All right, so evolution, part 2. Only those of you who are old enough to remember that movie will understand that. Go back and look at it. Evolution is and has always been ruthless. Ruthless. From best of show, you know, from the dogs, the best of show, to long forgotten, doesn't take much. Australopithecus, right? Early form of hominid. Homo habilis. Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, which we normally call a Neanderthal, which now is an insult. At the time, it was the top of the heap. They were the smartest people around, right? Once they were here, then they were there, and then they were gone, right? So, current acme, Homo sapiens sapiens. Do we have a right to be there? Do we have a guarantee of being there? All of the other ones thought that they were all of that in a bag of chips. Turned out not to be the case. Next acme, you notice the trademark there? That's Biden, the trademark. Machina sapiens sapiens, the intersection between human beings and machines. Through wet interfaces into our visual cortex, into our memory cortex, into our processing environments, into our eyes, into our ears. How many of you have heard of, what's the word? Corneal implants, right? Okay, they're already taking place, restoring blood vision. What about cochlear implants, restoring sound, right? Okay, so what's the next? Is we have a memory upgrade? I could use a defragmentation of my entire body, but you know, that's another thing. And of course, nobody knows what defragmentation is because you weren't around in the 80s and 90s to deal with microcomputers. Look it up, it's interesting. So, look for pivotal signs. Pivotal signs where artificial intelligence becomes capable of becoming machina sapiens sapiens. Compositional thinking, or meta learning for compositionality, MLC. Not only the ability to have rules-based type of environments where you say, if this, then this, if this, then this, you can have a logic tree, all of that, right? You can do medical diagnosis like that for 99.8% of the conditions and obviate medical doctors altogether, move the majority of them, right? You get down to the specialists, right? Because I mean, when you go to the doctor, what does he or she do? Run you through a battery of tests, ask you a bunch of questions, and write you a prescription for, you know, antibiotics or an antiviral or whatever it is, right? So, but when you start making inferences that are not part of a decision tree, that's when you get into compositionality, right? Isaac Newton, apple tree. Apple falls, hits him on the head. Huh. Why did that apple fall? There have been tens of millions of people before that saw apples fall. Not a single one of them said, ha, gravity.
Yes.
Right? Yet this dude went, that's interesting. Why is that? And boom, there it is. Right? Compositionality, right? So that type of, extrapolation is right around the corner. And then it becomes very interesting, right? Wet interface maturity. Not just for sensors, you can literally have an implant into your neural cortex, or your visual cortex, with a camera that will allow you to see certain types of images, right? That's a wet interface that is sensory in nature and provides information into your processing machine that it processes it and creates with a reality that approaches that of reality externally. But what about for data access? So that you have a USB drive, I'm just joking, and you plug it into here, and you now have access to the entire internet, right? Well, guess what? You have it here, right? And this can be miniaturized and placed here. And you can stream voice into it, you can stream images into it, right? Those can be processed either locally or remotely, and the results can come back to you.
But they can be paired.
I'm sorry?
They can be paired.
Yeah,
It's a problem.
yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, all of these things come with problems, right? But remember, the beginnings of medicine, you know what they would do? Let blood out, right? That was the cure for, 90% of the stuff. The other 10%, they cut it off. Yeah, we've gotten a little better at that, right? But anyway, wet interfaces, a very interesting concept. Self-awareness, okay? Self-awareness. Some would argue that some of the most advanced AI engines out there are already self-aware, that they have seen artificial intelligence engines start to interface with each other with their own language, that they have not learned anything, that they've developed on their own, and that are aware of their existence, face the other AI. Okay, so how much time? It's just a matter of time. Just a matter of time. Complex emotions, right? We human beings have them, not always logical. Machines now, for the time being, are still 100% logical as far as I can tell. That too shall pass. And now what? What's our advantage? So, thought abstraction, right? We're the only animal that can do thought abstraction, as far as we know, right? And when that gets recreated, it becomes a different ballgame. Philosophically speaking, is it inherently bad for the universe? Let's assume that for some reason civilization ends tomorrow. Is the universe better off, worse off, or it doesn't make any difference? Because we're only important to ourselves, right? I don't want to go into the spiritual and religious realm. It's a different ballgame. That's unique from individual to individual, right? But it's all very relative, right? And the universe itself is likely to outlast any civilization that took place. And so it's important to think about how you fit into that. So, what is, will not be. If you don't remember anything about what I talked about, remember this sentence. What is, will not be. Everything will change. Like I talked about your grandparents and you, everything is different. Everything is different. I can show you pictures from rural Portugal, where I grew up, where my father grew up, that have nothing to do with anything that we do today. Nothing, zero. Many of you come from countries where in rural areas, even today, it's very difficult to fathom that that exists at the same time that this exists. And that will continue, accelerating. So, how do you cope with it? You could choose to have it create enormous amounts of anxiety, Has always been the case. You could choose to think, oh my God, all the jobs will be gone away and everything else. But throughout history, that has never turned out to be the case. There's always a new adventure for people who are willing to be adventurous, right? Learning to relentlessly learn, okay? 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you'll graduate, you'll go out there. 90% of what you learned here, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will be irrelevant. So what? But you learned how to learn. You learned how to learn. Now there's another thing I'm going to throw into the equation that you might not have heard before, but it's equally important. The willingness to relentlessly unlearn. Unlearn all the stuff that is no longer true. At one point in time, we believed that if we put an individual in an automobile, and that automobile went faster than 100 kilometers per hour, that individual would die because of the speed. We believed that people would die when they passed the speed of sound, right? So when we sent, his name escapes me now, up there, and he broke the speed of sound, he himself didn't know if he was going to survive that, right? And so, learn to unlearn what is no longer relevant. Evolving ethics questions. They have always been with us, and over time, they were dealt with, and we moved forward. Believe it or not, the Magna Carta, how many of you have heard of the Magna Carta? Okay, read about it. Okay, the Magna Carta was an enormous advancement in civilization terms. And it was part of the origin of the Constitution of the United States, right? The inscription of rights to individuals. That was mind-boggling at the time. Nobody thought about that. Nobody thought, whoever thought that all men and women were created equal? No, there was the royalty and the nobility, and there were the peasants. And they were not equal, right? All of that comes into fruition at all times. IVF, in vitro fertilization, right? It used to be an enormous ethical question, right? And now it's not. Stem cells. Do you know that the development of stem cells was stopped for a while because most of them originated from harvested fetal tissue? And they put so much pressure into the science that the scientists found how to harness stem cells from regular fat. Wish they would turn all of mine into stem cells, right? And there you go. So there was a challenge from an ethics perspective, and there's a solution that is arrived at, right? And so that's going to continue to be the case. And the problems keep getting worse and worse and worse and worse from an ethics perspective. That's why crime shows and legal shows are so successful, because we keep getting faced with stuff that we never thought about before, right? Right? That's always in the history of mankind, right? Moral ambiguity, right? You're going to have to learn how to deal with that. The absolutes. I like to put a question that some people cringe about, but let me ask you this. Let's assume that I'm sitting in this chair, and this chair is hooked up to a mechanism that can deliver unthinkable amounts of pain to me. And you are given a button, and you say, if you press that button, Andre will be exposed to unbelievable amounts of pain forever. If you don't press that button, civilization ends in 10 minutes. What would you do? What would I do? If I was sitting in the chair, I would press the button myself, right? But it is a moral question, right? Those will keep coming, and you have to deal with them. You have to understand how to deal with them from a rational standpoint, from a humanity standpoint. Because what faces us in the future is tremendous from that standpoint. The urgency of being consequential. And this is where I want to talk to you as young people who are given this enormous advantage of a college education in a quality school. You can use it strictly for selfish purposes. You can go out there and get a great job. You get a great car. You get a house in the lake. You get a boat. You get an airplane. You get a large television, or 10. Right? Is that the meaning of life? Is that being consequential? What if you decide to go out there, pick a field where you can benefit all of mankind, and apply every single ounce of energy that you have to that endeavor? Imagine that 10% of you do that. What are the consequences for humanity from that happening? Absolutely astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. So my challenge to you is to do exactly that. I was 12 years old when I was asked by a priest in a moral and religious class in Portugal what I wanted written in my epitaph. Right, my little, in the cemetery. And the entire class was asked. And we all came up with stupid stuff. The best soccer player in the world. The best singer, the most famous rock and roll player, all that. He sent us all back home and said, think about what matters. Think about how you become influential in all of society. And we all came back with much more thoughtful approaches to that. I chose to be thoughtful, pragmatic, and consequential. My challenge to you is to be consequential. Not because you want to be remembered, but because there's got to be a meaning to life that's bigger than who we are as individuals. And if you are consequential, there's no higher pantheon of human achievement that you can aspire for. And so that's my challenge to all of you. Be consequential. Your higher purpose. Chase it relentlessly, and you will achieve it. Gamete survival. The prime directive of evolution. Survival. Right? You want to have children, whether you're a bacteria or a human being. Well, maybe that doesn't need to be the prime directive. The betterment of humankind. In all of its forms, present and future. Maybe that should be your prime directive. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I gave you a lot to think about, but I could tell by some of your expressions that you had already thought about a lot of these things, which is great. So, I don't know how much time we have. Maybe another 15 minutes? Who's in charge of this game? Hey, how much time do we have? 5 minutes! Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I spoke too long. My apologies. Anyway, questions? Questions. And you better have some. Come on. Yes, sir.
What do you think?
Can I have your hair?
My hair?
Yeah.
I think I just saved
I know, I need to find the genetic analysis of this guy, so I can have, some stem cells or something. I don't know. All right, your question, sir.
Just to pick your brain, when do you think we'll find a cure to cancer, for example?
So, it's funny because people talk about the cure for cancer, like there's one cancer. Cancer is a multivarious, by and large, a lot of cancers are already being cured. Okay, that's the reality, and sometimes we don't think about it. The number of cancers for which the 5-year prognosis is now very good is enormous. The number of cancers for which complete remission has been achieved are enormous, right? But there are still some that are very, very pernicious, especially the ones that are fast-moving. Glioblastomas, for example, that type of stuff, right? So, it will come when we come to realize the mechanism that causes cancer cells to all of a sudden start replicating rapidly without any of them dying. Because here's the funny thing about cancer. Cancer cells are immortal. Unless they're externally killed, they themselves are immortal, right? And so, which is an interesting possibility, right? Imagine that you have the ability to harness the immortality of cancer cells without their lethality, and you have a very interesting proposition, right? And so when we finally figure out what is the mechanism that triggers that replication that is totally chaotic and random, right? And know how to turn it off, then we'll be in a good place to solving the majority of them. There will always be a weird one out there, but by and large, we have found the mechanisms that allow for the majority of cancers to be taken care of. Still, to this day, with some side effects, with chemotherapies and radiations and all of that, but far more advanced than we were being. I mean, I can tell you this. My father developed vocal cord carcinoma when he was 48, so that was a long time ago, last century, okay? And immediately I thought, my father's gonna die. He lived with, he was operated, and he developed another cancer, bone marrow cancer, polycythemia vera. And I thought, he's gonna die. I'm gonna lose my father. He lived another 35 years on chemotherapy daily, right? And at 76, he died at about the average of the Portuguese man of his vintage, right? And so, how many of you know a breast cancer survivor? Yeah? Okay. So, we're getting there. We're getting there. There will always be outliers, but we have made such great progress that I think over the next 5-10 years, we will see the overwhelming majority of cancers either being totally prevented to start with, or rapidly dealt with genetic engineering.
Thank you.
Yeah. What else?
We have
Yes, sir.
one, sorry, but we only had time for one more question, and he raised his hand after.
Okay, I'll try to do it fast. Go ahead.
Hi sir, I'm Teja doing my master's in data science. So my question to you is, one of the key differences between a human being and an AI system is consciousness or self-awareness. So do you see the possibility of imparting consciousness or self-awareness to an AI system using quantum computing or quantum physics?
I think that the systems themselves would reach that stage without us having anything to do with it. They'll be self-directed.
So would you say that there would be no difference between a human being and an AI system?
There will always be difference. But the question is, are the difference consequential? Do the difference make a difference? And that answer, is for us to find out. There's a moral component to us, right? That goes beyond logic and that is something that I don't know that it will be achieved very quickly in AI. And that's why in Star Trek, the humans always win, right? Yes, sir.
Just a comment. You might think it's far-fetched, but if you search Neuralink, Elon Musk right now, he puts chips in the brain so people that are paraplegic can control computers. So it's already happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. It'll be here faster and faster and faster. So be consequential. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for that, and another round of applause. That was a wonderful, wonderful keynote.